September 8, 1941, the containment line closed around Leningrad. German and Finnish armed forces had isolated the Soviet Union's second-largest city, a major industrial center and Baltic Fleet base. Finnish troops had reached their previous border, established defenses, and did not advance into the city's northern approaches. Yet, that restraint did not open an escape route. It merely fixed the northern barrier, while German pressure sealed the rest. Trapped inside were 3.2 million people. German planning treated conquest as more than a mere operational objective. Leningrad represented Soviet political symbolism, weapons production, and the Baltic Fleet's main base, and Hitler wanted it razed, with its population killed or driven east under General Plan Ost. The encirclement, therefore, became a destruction mechanism rather than a conventional capture timetable. The Germans could simply let hunger perform the work of bombardment. A modern metropolis had been converted into a sealed consumption problem. By September 1941, the city was completely trapped between German and Finnish lines. The Finnish decision not to assault Leningrad has sometimes been mistaken for relief, but it was anything but. Their positions blocked Soviet efforts to rupture the blockade from the north, perfectly preserving the encirclement's geometry. No corridor led to the Soviet interior, and vital resources, including access toward Moscow, had been cut away. The city's defense held. Its supply system, however, did not. Leningraders built anti-tank fortifications and created a stable defense. But every successful barrier also confirmed that civilians would remain trapped inside. Refugee movement into the city ceased with the siege. Evacuation began, yet countless people died during the attempt from air raids, starvation, and biting cold. Some unregistered dead were never buried or counted amid the chaos of bombardment and escape. The administrative ledger failed exactly where survival was most fragile. How many vanished entirely beyond the census? For 872 days, Leningrad endured a blockade in which time itself became an instrument of deprivation. A shortage that might be survived briefly became a grueling condition, carried from one meal into the next, and then from one season into another. As a result, uncertainty hardened into routine, with residents facing the grim prospect that no supply rhythm would ever return. Duration was no longer just chronology. It was the crushing pressure that made every basic need impossible to meet. The winter of 1941 to 1942 was the critical failure phase. Hunger, freezing temperatures, disease, and artillery injuries converged on households already stripped of ordinary supplies. In 1942 alone, an estimated 650,000 citizens died from starvation, disease, exposure, and continual bombardment. Domestic survival became a desperate sequence of substitutions. Documented residents ate wood dust and glue boiled from wallpaper. Families exchanged beloved pets for consumption, and there were even incidents of cannibalism. The kitchen had effectively become the front line. A surviving diary preserved the siege as a devastating chain of household disappearances. One young girl recorded deaths on December 28th, January 25th, March 17th, May 10th, and May 13th, followed by a final entry stating her family was gone and only she remained. This was not a mere operational statistic. It was a child's shrinking universe, measured by lost relatives and fading hours. In starvation, the oldest often died first, until eventually, age ceased to be any protection at all. The siege did not produce a single uniform civilian response. Diaries, police records, and state documents show opportunism right alongside empathy, egoism beside deep compassion. When institutions faltered, local relationships became the ultimate survival infrastructure. Food itself could anchor people to one another, much like family, neighbors, and shared obligations. Yet that very same scarcity widened social distance, where a loaf of bread, a warm stove, or a place in an evacuation line turned into a moral negotiation under lethal pressure. The outer world did eventually reach Leningrad, but through a route highly vulnerable to weather and attack: the ice road across Lake Ladoga. German air and artillery strikes constantly attempted to interdict supplies, while desperate evacuees moved outward. By February, the road functioned efficiently enough that food and medicines entered in increasing quantities, allowing more civilians to escape. Warmth returned to some homes, though the blockade still held firm. The supply corridor had simply prevented the city from dying on schedule, This ice road was no miracle, detached from logistics. It required vehicles, fuel, drivers, loading crews, strict ice discipline, and repeated movement under constant threat. Compare its fragility with the broader Allied vehicle pipeline, where roughly 400,000 trucks were shipped to Russia, making the Red Army more mobile than the Wehrmacht. A standard 5,000-pound cargo truck could travel up to 300 miles. Leningrad's route, however, relied entirely on whether shifting ice, enemy fire, and exhausted personnel would permit just one more crossing. Post-war classification exposes a second battlefield, the battlefield of language. The blockade was not classified as a war crime when it occurred, yet later historians have described it as genocide, arguing that the city's destruction and the systematic starvation of civilians were entirely intentional. This disagreement is no simple semantic cleanup. It determines whether mass civilian death is filed as a collateral consequence, or as the intended output of state policy. What evidentiary threshold separates brutal siege warfare from organized annihilation? Set Leningrad against Stalingrad. The blockade lasted 6.5 times as long as that famous battle, yet Leningrad's suffering fitted far less easily into a tidy victory narrative. While Stalingrad could be celebrated as a heroic military triumph, Leningrad carried a much darker burden: slow hunger, freezing apartments, mass graves, and a population surviving without a clean battlefield climax. Its tactical success was sheer endurance, but its human record was an accumulated absence, measured one vanished household at a time. Piskaryovskoe Memorial Cemetery contains mass graves holding the remains of 500,000 people who died during the siege. That single site makes the demographic catastrophe physically legible, even if it cannot fully resolve it. Other estimates place siege deaths at 800,000, 1.2 million citizens, or roughly 1.5 million civilians and soldiers combined. The numbers vary because categories differ and civic records shattered under siege conditions. The cemetery does not settle the cruel arithmetic. Rather, it visually demonstrates what every estimate is desperately trying to count. At the time of liberation, one account places approximately 600,000 people still alive inside the city, while around 1 million had been evacuated before and during the siege. These are not interchangeable columns in a casualty ledger. One measures those present when the Red Army arrived. The other measures the desperate removal from danger across multiple stages. Survival splits into two separate ledgers: movement and endurance. How many evacuees safely arrived and how many simply vanished en route? The survivors did not simply leave the siege behind in 1944. Research on blockade survivors found trauma fixation persisting deep into adult life, alongside an acute awareness of vulnerability, fragility, emotional sensitivity, and intense empathy for others. A later joint American-Soviet research program surveyed men born in Leningrad between 1916 and 1935. For them, starvation had become a long-duration exposure, not merely a fleeting wartime episode. Liberation ended the physical blockade, but it could never erase its lasting physiological and psychological aftermath. Memory of the siege immediately became part of the city's rebuilt identity. Leningrad was the first Soviet city designated a hero city, recognizing profound civilian bravery and tenacity. Cultural figures like composer Dmitry Shostakovich and poet Anna Akhmatova survived the blockade, producing monumental works shaped by its ordeal. Yet the city's rebuilt fabric retained haunting gaps where buildings once stood, with scars of damage still visible in places. Post-war reconstruction successfully restored streets and grand facades, but it could never reconstruct the missing households that once thrived behind them. Following Stalin's death in 1953, the political climate finally allowed wider attention to experiences beyond official state accounts of military genius. By 1960, the first memorial complex for Leningrad's civilian war dead opened at Piskaryovskoe, and Leonid Brezhnev later elevated the siege within the broader cult of the Great Patriotic War. Memory had effectively become a state ritual, a source of personal grief, and public architecture all at once. The question was no longer whether Leningrad had endured. It was whose version of endurance would ultimately define the story. Leningrad survived the blockade, but its survival was far from a clean outcome. While German and Finnish lines failed to capture the city, hunger, cold, bombardment, and disease still consumed its people on an industrial scale. The precarious ice road brought food, medicine, and a chance for exit, even as families inside improvised meals from wood dust and wallpaper glue, and children documented the collapse of entire households. By January 1944, the siege line finally broke. Yet, the missing population remained, the final, permanent terrain of a devastating battle.